everyone. My name is Dawn Maselli, and I am the Lee County Bar Association Tort Litigation Chair. Thank you all for coming to the CLE event today. We have Mr. Stephen Smith speaking to us about jury trials in this new age. Just a quick background on Stephen. He is a partner for the Ticket Clinic, a law firm focusing on traffic and criminal defense with 30 offices throughout Florida and Georgia, one of which is actually in Fort Myers. Stephen has experience in over 200 jury trials, ranging from DUI to first-degree murder, and he practices in the entire state of Georgia and throughout 3 circuits in Florida, including the 20th Judicial Circuit. As an alumni of the Florida Bar Leadership Academy, he has been appointed to serve as a board member for the Grievance Committee and is currently a board member for Florida Legal Services. Mr. Smith further serves his community as past president for Rotary and has been selected to lecture for more than 2,000 hours on legal issues and civil rights. He was involved in one of the first jury trials in Florida since the pandemic hit, and he's actually in the middle of a jury trial right now. He's on his lunch break. If you have any questions, please enter your question into the chat box. And I know Stephen will be happy to answer those questions throughout the presentation. So without further ado, Stephen, I'm handing it over to you.
Thank you, Dawn. I'm so glad to be here. I wanted to thank you, Dawn, for giving me this opportunity. Dawn and I are both alumni of the Leadership Academy. We were in the same class, and that's how we came to find each other. And I appreciate you, Dawn, for giving me this opportunity to speak about this. I also wanted to send some thank you to Judge Morgan, because as Dawn mentioned, I am currently in a jury trial right now. We are selecting a jury. We have break for lunch, and Judge Morgan allowed me to have my presentation here in the courtroom, which gives us a unique opportunity to see the courtroom for anyone who hasn't seen what a courtroom looks like. It's a bit different than what you may be used to. I'd also like to thank Indian River County Sheriff's Office, and particularly Deputy Davis. He's here with me. A deputy has to be in the courtroom anytime it's open, so he's here sort of babysitting. There is no active evidence, fortunately, in here, but I do want to thank him for being here during his lunch break. I also want to thank the National Institute for Trial Advocacy for my preparation in this. I did get some discussion topics from them as well. So I wanted to start this off and just invite everyone to chat and question as much as possible, so it's not just a monologue of me discussing this, because I'm sure you all have had your own experiences during this pandemic. And yes, we are, in case you haven't noticed, we are in the middle of a pandemic right now, and I want to talk a little bit about that. So you all probably know that this is not the first pandemic, that pandemics have been with us as human beings throughout time. On general, pandemics happen every 8 to 10 years. In fact, some of you may remember the H1N1 and the swine flu. And fortunately, those pandemics didn't affect us nearly as much as this one. But some of those have been actually more devastating for what happened during that time, meaning more of a death rate. There is a lot of dynamic going on with this particular pandemic, because although there is a high number of people that have passed to it, the death rate is relatively low in percentages compared to others. So that offers a very unique opportunity for this pandemic, because it can keep going, because a lot of people aren't taking it as serious as, say, a pandemic that would have a 33% or a 0.5%, such as bubonic plague. I can pretty much guarantee you, if it was a 50% chance of death upon someone receiving this, we wouldn't be having trial right now. So it does give us opportunity to go into things. One occurs every 8 to 10 years, and some theorize that this isn't going to be the last one, that there could be more to come. On that note, though, we have also learned recently that we have received a potential cure for this. And that may be coming out within the weeks to months to come. So that gives us some hope as well. 1918, you all may be aware of the Spanish flu. And when I say cure, I misspoke. I should say vaccine is what it is. And that's certainly not a cure for that. So we still may be dealing with side effects of this pandemic for years to come. For example, 1918 is when we had the Spanish flu, and that lasted about 2 years. So this could be with us for a long time, despite the fact that we do have a vaccine. So let's get into how this is going to have an effect and what effect this has had on the courts. And certainly we are in a state of flux. You all have noticed this. We are currently having our discussion here by Zoom. I'm not here in person. So that obviously has created the necessity for innovation. Now, Zoom has been with us obviously for a while, but I cannot recall having a Zoom hearing prior to the pandemic. So we are innovating things, and I think we're becoming more and more comfortable with speaking in this capacity. And certainly, there are courts that are still doing things in person as I'm doing now, but there are a lot of courts that are doing jury trials, believe it or not, remotely. And we'll talk about that later on. But what changes can you expect? So this is now my second jury trial, as Don mentioned. Many other hearings, but second jury trial. I'm in Indian River County. The last trial that I had, which was in mid-October, was in St. Lucie County, and that one was stated to be the first one in Florida. I don't know if that's true. It's not. We have offices all over Florida. The other attorneys had mentioned that there was no other jury trial, so it's possible that was the first one. I know Georgia has not had any jury trials since the pandemic because of their Supreme Court. So I know that there's been others since then, and certainly there's one here in Indian River County. So let's talk about what changes you can expect if you are called to a jury trial in your circuit. And by the way, I have practiced in 20th Circuit, as Don mentioned, mainly in Glades County. I don't get to Lee County, where probably most of you are coming from. I haven't been in that courthouse, so I'd certainly like to hear from you all as to how that is arranged. But the first thing you're going to notice is that the type of courtrooms that judges are going to use for trials are going to be limited. They're going to select the courtrooms that are going to be the biggest, and that is really going to limit how many jury trials they're going to be able to have. For example, I'm in the largest courtroom here in Indian River County. The other ones are, significantly smaller, and they've chosen this one. There's a lot of courts throughout the nation that aren't even hosting the jury trials in the courthouse. They're choosing other venues. They're choosing gymnasiums, for example. They're choosing high school cafeterias. They're being very creative as to where they're going to host the jury trial. And of course, that brings a lot of unique challenges. At least in this courtroom, we have sort of the basics. We have where the judge is going to sit. We're going to have, the basic areas to where the jury is going to sit and where the sides are. But that too has even changed. For example, you may notice when you're doing the jury trial that the witnesses may be sitting where the clerks normally sit. You may be noticing that where the parties sit may be different. They may be sitting, normally they're sitting sort of next to each other, both facing the same way. That may be not true in your jurisdiction. You may be sort of perpendicular to the other side. You may be across the room from the other side. You and your client, if your client is there may be differences there. So for example, in this courtroom, my client is sitting perpendicular to me. So these are all things that you're going to notice, and you need to be sort of familiar with this when you're coming in there, so it's not going to surprise you.
Even it's Dawn. I want to interrupt for just a quick minute. How has communication between you and your client been impacted with social distancing during the trial? Do you have any recommendations for effective communications, or are you just pushing a piece of paper across the desk?
Yeah, so for me, not much has changed because I've told my clients throughout the trials that I've had is pretty much write down if you have something that you say, unless it's urgent, write it down. That way I can focus on the trial, and I can also read what you have either after the scenario that's happening right now. I'll read it, or if you feel like I need to read it now, pass it over. So it really hasn't changed much. I tend to tell my clients in both trials that we need to take these precautions seriously. There's a lot of different feelings about COVID. Some take it very, very serious. Others, go as far to the extreme that they think it's a hoax. But I find that jurors are told not to judge the attorney. But I feel as though if I'm not taking this seriously, and you have the jurors that are, they're going to judge you for it. And they're here. A lot of them are probably nervous, And if you're not taking it serious and they see you whispering in the ear of your client or removing your mask, I think that they may hold that against you. So I would caution you about taking those rules lightly. Secondly, it would be devastating if during these jury trials, a juror or some jurors are to come down with coronavirus and it's linked to the actual courthouse. Uh, we at the courthouses, it'll just push everything back. When I was in St. Lucie County in October, they had a outbreak at the courthouse shortly after my jury trial in there. But fortunately, it wasn't attributed to the actual jury trial. It had to do with the clerk's office and maybe some screening of the employees coming through. But had it been linked to our jury trial, I do not think I would be having a jury trial right now. So for those reasons, I would recommend that you treat the masks and the social distancing and the other precautions with due regard and high regard. But to answer your question poignantly, Don, it hasn't really changed too much because of the ways I've asked my clients to communicate with me during the trial. But certainly I have to be more mindful about where they're sitting and sitting next to me and how I speak to them maybe during intermissions.
Going along those same lines, do you ask the jurors their thoughts on coronavirus, social distancing, and their position during jury selection?
Yeah, that's a great question. I ask if they feel safe. I think it's important that they do. And on that note, you're going to notice possibly your jury panels to be different because here in Indian River County, for example, there's a screen process before they even come into the courtroom. They can be let go if they meet certain conditions. One of them would be if they're a caretaker. So caretaker folks you may not find on your jury, and the question would be is how is that going to affect the trials and outcomes of that if certain people aren't coming in here. So let's talk a little bit more about that as to how certain people who may not be coming into the court. They found that elderly, you may find that your jury panels typically they're known to have older age people on the jury panels. You may find less of that because they feel that they're more vulnerable and they're just not coming. So for example, we tried to have this jury trial on Tuesday and we weren't able to have it. We only had, I think, 15 jurors that were showed up out of 50 or 60. So we couldn't have it then. We postponed it to today, and we're actually set up to do 2 different jury panels, which is another difference that you're going to have. It's going to take a lot longer because we can't fill the courtroom with 30 or 40 people. This time we filled it with 15, and we weren't able to gather all of our jurors on that one. So we brought in a second panel of 5, and we should be able to get one with them because we need one more left. Okay. So what else can we see? You'll also be noticing that other folks, other groups of folks that may feel vulnerable may be coming in. The media tells us that the minority groups are being affected more by this. So, if you have a client or that may wish to have a more diverse group, you may be finding that less. For this particular panel that I'm seeing today, it actually is diverse, more diverse than usual. So that sort of goes against what some folks may have thought. But I would ask the jurors if they feel safe, and if they don't, I think that you would ask the court to find measures to try to make them feel that way. Who will show? That's another sort of interesting topic. Who will show up? Well, maybe people who have qualities that you can't necessarily see. For example, maybe they believe in personal responsibility, or they are sort of accept the risks. So that may bring in a different group of people than others that may not. What happens if they feel that they don't feel safe? Are they going to be released? Probably. We've had a couple that have mentioned that, and they have been released. So I don't think the court wants to be in the position to make someone feel forced to be here if they don't want to be.
Stephen, we
What
have a
if?
question.
Yes, please.
Ashley writes, who is considered a caretaker? You said that caretakers can be excused.
Right. So what I mean by that is someone who may be caring for an elderly family member. Maybe their parent is elderly and they're caring for it, or maybe they're employed as a caretaker. So someone who cares for someone who is elderly, because the elderly is vulnerable to this pandemic, may be excused for that fact alone. We did, and curiously, we had one juror on the jury panel today that was a caretaker, or is a caretaker for her mother-in-law, and she indicated that her husband is leaving the state tomorrow, and her mother-in-law needs constant care, and she's going to be in charge of that. She was excused for cause. But we had a discussion that she probably shouldn't have been here in the first place, because that is one element that she should have been excused before even coming in here. So I hope that answers your question, Don. Is there any other questions pending?
I don't see any pending at this time.
Excellent. So another interesting topic is what would happen, of course, if a juror on the jury panel becomes or tests positive during your jury. I mean, my trial is probably going to be a day. It's going to be tomorrow, and that's it. But of course, civil trials can last, weeks, and you certainly can predict that possibly one of your jurors are going to come down and test positive. What is that going to do? What's probably going to be a mistrial. You may be thinking, well, we have alternate jurors, but if those jurors are been together, it's probably going to mistry the case. But if it depends on the judge, it depends on the discussions. But is 10 feet apart, if the person are the jurors going to feel comfortable if they were sitting next to someone that tested positive? I haven't experienced that, but I would guess it's probably going to cause a mistrial. But some people may differ on that. If you have enough alternates, then you may be able to deal with that. I can tell you here in Indian River, we're not just social distancing 6 feet, we're social distancing 10 feet. And now is actually probably a good time to share with you the courtroom. I'm going to show you around this courtroom here. You can see, of course, the judge's bench, and the judge sits where he normally does. But I'm going to come back here and show you where I was seated. And behind me is the audience, where the audience normally sits. Well, for the jury panel, they're sitting back there. This is where my client is sitting. So you can see he's sitting perpendicular to me. And then the state or the prosecutor is seated here. Her chairs are faced that way because that's where we're having the jury sit. But the jurors are not just sitting there. And by the way, let me just point out, you can see that the first row is taped off. They're having no jurors sit there for social distancing reasons. And then you can see, if you look closely, a piece of blue tape. You have one there. And then on this same row, if you look, you have one all the way down here. That's the distance that the judge and the courts are having the jurors sitting. So it's not just 6 feet. It's probably more like 12 feet. And then you have another juror that's going to sit back here where this piece of tape is. And you've got another one over here, and so on. You're going to notice when you take these jury tries that oftentimes they'll be putting seats. Like, for example, they put a seat here to keep that distance between where a juror sitting here and a juror sitting back here. We also utilize the regular jury section. We'll put jurors back here. There'll be, maybe 3 will be placed over here. You can see a piece of tape on this one, only one person on this row. You can see here, this is Deputy Davis. Thank you for being here. All right, this is the witness stand. So this is a difference for me. In St. Lucie County, we didn't have this plastic shield. I don't know if you can see that on camera, but there is a plastic shield that wraps around the witness box. In St. Lucie County, we didn't do that. We had a face shield. They would walk up here with a mask, and then they would take off the mask and put a face shield. So I think I like this a little better. Anything that's not going to have a barrier, the least amount of barrier between the jurors and the witness. So some other things, let's talk about the elephant in the room, the mask. Okay, you're going to be wearing a mask if you're doing this in person. What are some things that I've noticed? Well, right off the bat, I mean, the connection. Are you going to be able to connect with the jury? And I have found a very, very significant impact on my feeling connecting with the jury. Okay. I have, in my last jury, I wore a mask. It's similar to probably mask that you have. I would recommend, if you're required by the court to wear a mask, which you should, or some sort of barrier, that you get this device. This device right here basically keeps the mask off of your mouth. So you're not literally eating the mask. You're going to be wearing that mask all day. Okay. The only reason why I'm not wearing a mask now is the only person in this room is Deputy Davis, and he's all the way across the room. And of course, I'm speaking to you. But this device right here, I find, is very, very good. It goes right into your mask. It keeps the mask, off of your face if you're going to be wearing a long period of time. Okay. However, in this trial, the judge allows the attorneys to wear a face shield. Okay. Now, there could be certainly some discussion. I know there's a lot of debate about how this virus spreads. And there's the theory that it's aerosol. I don't know how much this is going to stop. If I'm putting this on my head, you can see there's gaps all throughout here. So if it's aerosol, I don't know. I don't know if it's coming through here or not. And I don't know what the jurors are thinking, but the judge has ordered me to wear this. I think this is probably better for connectivity than the mask, where the prosecutor is wearing this as well. So I felt I chose to wear that, but the jurors may have issue with that. They haven't mentioned that, but it may be something I would want to ask when they come back in.
Stephen,
Yes.
when you do a jury trial with a mask on, not the face shield, but a mask, is there a way to compensate the connection and the personalization between you and the jury with that mask on? A lot of personality is in your face and your smile. How did you handle that?
Okay, and I'm glad. That's a great question. And this kind of dovetails in, if there's one thing you're going to remember from this discussion, this is going to be it. Because you absolutely are going to lose connection with the jurors with that mask on. I mean, you have your eyes. They say, the window to someone is through their eyes. But without the mouth, I mean, included in the rest of the face, it's really, really difficult to express emotion. And I'm more of a theatrical attorney. I like to move around. In fact, the judge had to remind me a couple times at the podium, because he asked, stay at the podium. I had to be reminded a couple times not to move around. So in that regard, the one thing to remember is visuals. Bring visuals, technology. Okay. And this is absolutely not my strength. So I'll admit that right now. In fact, Don asked me, hey, Stephen, do you have PowerPoint? What are you gonna have? PowerPoint? No, that's something I need to learn. Unfortunately for me, the prosecution has that, and they bring forth, TV screens and technology and all of this. This may not be news to you, because I think we all know that images speak louder than words. Okay, but I think that having technology and having these visuals and having it be, clear, having it be exciting, having it connect with the jurors is ever so much more important now than when we have these masks on. And there's a lot of jurisdictions doing, like I said, they're doing jury trials not in person, but they're doing remote. So I mean, how cool would it be as you connect with your people to have these visuals? If I could have things pop up on the screen to make my points. So I am in the works of having these aids, because it is very, very important. In my last jury trial, the other side had it, and I thought it was very, very effective, even more effective than it normally is, because we're sort of limited with these masks on, even more so than normal. So I hope that answers your question. But Don, I would absolutely 100% say, bring in the technology, bring in the visuals. Let's talk about during voir dire, which we're doing now. We're having to do it twice. So you're gonna, whatever time a jury trial would have taken before the COVID, you can pretty much double it. That's what's happening here. We're having to bring in 2 jury panels, and we're of course having to do voir dire all over again. I want to kind of switch directions up and talk about, what if we do trials remote? How do we do that? Through Zoom. Believe it or not, right now there are a number of jurisdictions around the United States that are doing jury trials completely remote. Now, they're doing it a couple different ways. Right now, most of them are bringing in the jurors to the courthouse, and they're putting them elsewhere. They may put them in a different courtroom, and they'll give them a screen. They may put them in a conference room. Uh, but I think where we're probably heading is we may be giving jurors equipment and they will be coming from their own home. That's where the discussions are coming from. And it's a very interesting discussion because although there's going to be issues with that, one thing it'll allow people to do is perhaps bring in more diversity and more folks that can be part of the jury pool that normally couldn't, maybe because of transportation issues. I mean, I'm literally talking about the courts will employ IT people who will deliver the equipment to the jurors so that they can be part of and they'll be there with them, be in communication with them to get it set up and have everything done in their own home. So I think that offers a great experience. I think that's probably a direction where we may be going. I think people can certainly reasonably argue about that, particularly with the vaccine coming back. I mean, who knows? Maybe 6 months from now, a year from now, we'll be back to where we were. But I think what we're realizing is that Zoom and these other remote things, these innovations are potentially here to stay. I mean, just to kind of give you an example, I was in Atlanta yesterday covering a hearing, and I was also covering a hearing down here in Florida. I would have been never able to do that as an attorney, of course. So I'm able to be in two places at once. You're going to have attorneys who can certainly expand their practices and be in places 2, 3, 4 times. I think that you're having a lot of discussion about meetings, right? Where people would have traveled to meet in person. They're doing it by Zoom, and I think they're finding that it works. They're not going to be traveling. We have people who are working from home. So I think I think we may be going that route where jurors can be that. So, but of course, we have to think about the issues as well. What about witnesses? If a witness is going to testify from their own home, how are we going to be able to be sure that they're not being, influenced by someone there behind the camera? I've thought about this. I can't really think of a sure way. Perhaps you all can, but if a witness is coming from a location, there's really no way to tell that they're not being influenced by someone off the camera, at least to my knowledge. So I think those are issues that we'd have. So we're kind of slow to change right now. Donna, any other questions right now from anyone?
Yes, we do have a couple of questions, but going along the lines of witnesses attending by Zoom or just remote, have you had any of your witnesses appear by Zoom or video conferencing in the two trials that you've done during the pandemic? And what are your thoughts on pre-recording those or doing it live? And how did that impact your presentation in front of the jury if you did utilize those video conferencing tools?
Right. So in the both trials that I have done, they have not been by Zoom, um, but I have had trials by Zoom, and those have been traffic hearings. So it's sort of interesting because the traffic hearings, traffic tickets is what I'm talking about. Usually, traffic court's a lot more casual. Okay, the rules are a little bit more casual, and I've been finding it's very interesting because hearing officers are willing to go into these type of things and utilize these technologies. So I can speak for that. I have cross-examined, witnesses by Zoom, and it certainly, as far as taping it, that would not be effective from my position because you can't cross-examine someone who's been, obviously recorded. It's got to be live, right? But I have sensed that there may be influence going on. This was a civilian witness, and it was a person involved in a crash, and they were a driver of vehicle two, and they were, of course, accusing my client of being at fault and ultimately committing the violation. So it had a really interesting dynamic, but overall, I think it works. And the hearing officer was there to moderate it, and if there was issues, there were objections. People talking over each other. Sometimes people are on silent. I mean, you're going to hear that a lot. Hey, we can't hear you. You're muted. All of those issues are happening, but I think we're becoming more clean. I think we're getting used to this. And one other thing, since we're on the topic, is I think when you're speaking by Zoom or remotely, it's a completely different way to be persuasive than when you may be used to. As trial attorneys, I have mentioned that I like to be theatrical. I like to be out. I think people tried to do the whole thing the way they did it before. They would get maybe a podium. They would set it up, with Zoom. They'd have a podium back here. They'd maybe be walking around. It just doesn't work. The way it works is the way that we're talking here. But you got to be mindful of some things. And maybe some of you have recognized I haven't, you want to be looking directly at the camera. And a lot of people are uncomfortable with that. I'm a little uncomfortable with that. And I want to remind myself to look at the camera, not down. I've been looking down. I've been looking over here. You want to look directly at the camera because that's how you're going to connect with your people. And if you're going to be trying to persuade jurors, you're going to want to do that. If you're looking down, if you're looking elsewhere, unless you say it. Now, if you are going to make a point, if you want to read something, then the advice is you tell them, tell the listeners, hey, listen, I think this is important enough and I want to get it right. So I'm going to read, from this form, and you actually will read it. So you want to be very, very intensive in that and tell the viewers what you're doing. But other than that, you want to be looking directly into the camera so you can have that connection with those eyes. Don?
We do have a couple of comments from Scott and Pamela going back to witnesses appearing remotely. They've said that the judge has asked the witnesses to show the room utilizing the camera so that they can ensure that they were alone and not being influenced by anybody else.
Excellent. Well, that's a great idea. My only question is how do we know that someone doesn't come in the room afterwards? So that would be my only rebuttal to that. And I think that, but certainly that would be one, I guess, deterrent for that. Any other questions?
We do have one question from Jeremiah talking about jury selection. You mentioned it's taking longer to do jury selection. He asks, have you found it necessary to alter or adjust your approach to jury selection to account for potential changes in the makeup of the jury pool due to the pandemic?
I've only had two, so I haven't changed those as far as the makeup. And actually, for this one, the second of the two, the makeup is more diverse. Indian River County is not known to be the most diverse county, but for this particular one, we have quite a bit of diversity. I don't know how to explain that. The first one as well was relatively diverse as well. So I haven't really changed that up. I think I would though recommend that you ask the jurors if they feel safe, and you certainly address anything that they bring up.
Okay, and Scott asks, have you had any remote witnesses appear by Zoom?
Right. So yes, I have had a remote witness again on a traffic case. So I would have the individual testify. I mean, controlling your witnesses is probably going to be a little bit more difficult because you're not right there. I mean, sometimes I use touch to control a witness. If they're going to go a little too far, I just put my hand on their back and they know. I'm not going to be able to do that. I've had some judges become upset when I've appeared with the witness in the same room. I mean, this is at the beginning stages of the COVID. This was my first Zoom hearing, and I unwittingly was in the same room with my client. And the judge probably appropriately admonished us for being in the same room. It probably sends the wrong message to anyone else that was there. So we quickly corrected that, and I set him up in his own room with a different network. But those are some things that I think we're starting to hash out, and we're becoming more comfortable with them. Any other questions?
We don't have any questions at this time, but we do encourage others to chime in.
Well, folks, that's pretty much all I have as far as recommendations. Again, if there's one thing you're going to take from this is technology is where it's at now. If you're going to be having jury trials in person or remote, if I had some visuals here, if I knew how to do that, I would absolutely have it. I think it would be a lot more effective of relaying what I'm trying to, and I'm making an important factor in my life to learn and get that done.
I do have a question regarding the technology. A lot of times courthouses allow parties to utilize their courthouse technology. Is that still the case, or because of COVID, are you seeing courthouses limiting the use of technology, in-house, and you have to bring technology yourself?
In the circuit that I'm at right now in Indian River County, which is the 19th Judicial Circuit, there is technology here. It's a large screen, computer-ish TV screen that it's capable of touch, so you can do that. The problem that I'm seeing is I'm not here all the time, so I'm probably not going to be able to play with that off hours. Like, for example, the prosecutors here know it like the back of their hand. It's almost like it's theirs, and then if I'm going to use it, I'm borrowing it. So And I haven't asked, but I would guess I wouldn't be able to come here after hours. Maybe I can. I think that would probably be a good idea. If you can, come here before trial, make sure you're familiar with the equipment, because for me, the reason why I don't like technology is that it always seems like something's going wrong. So get used to that. If you have your own, that's probably best. I have seen some jurisdictions in Georgia. I just wonder. Everyone's got their own TV screen. There's TV screens all over the courthouse. So it's vastly different depending on the county as to what. And then others. I mean, there's not a TV screen in the entire courthouse, it seems like. So I think we're going that direction. My first trial, the way it was positioned was very, very awkward. The TV screen was positioned in front of the jurors, but the defendant or myself couldn't see it. Now, you may be saying, well, didn't you know what they were going to show? And the answer is yes, but I would like to be able to see what the jurors were seeing, during that, to see the context, to see the reactions. And I had to, literally get up and sort of walk behind the jurors. And it kind of felt like myself and my client were second class. Everyone else could see it except us. And we had to sort of position ourselves behind that. And I had to get probably closer to the jury than I should have in order to see it. So I think more thought need to be put into that. And I think we're going to be getting into a situation where there's going to be a lot more screens in our courtrooms. But one thing I wanted to touch base on is how some of these jurisdictions, I've got jurisdictions in Texas, Colorado, Wisconsin, that are all reporting remote jury trials. And I just think this is fascinating, and particularly about the equipment being delivered to these potential jurors' residents, and getting set up that way, because I think it just really will operate if we can get that so that we can get it accurate and get it so that we can get through the hurdles of that. I really think it offers a lot of opportunity. I think we will be dealing less with space, because I think space is going to be a big issue with these courthouses. The courthouses were not designed for COVID, or these other pandemics that may be coming down the pike. All right, with that, I don't have any other things to say unless there's some questions. I'd like to take those.
I don't see any questions in the chat. If you do have a question, please put it in the chat, and I'm sure Stephen will be happy to answer those. One thing you said, Stephen, which will be interesting to see, doing remote jury trials and having technology sent to the potential juror's home, is how do you keep distractions away? How do you keep that dog from barking or wanting to go outside? How do you keep the cell phone away from them, and being able to monitor that? So that is something that will be a hurdle, and it'll be interesting to see how that's handled in the future.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm glad you're bringing that point. I meant to bring up that point is, Zoom features that's the sort of one weakness to that, is people tend to sort of become more distracted. Okay. I've been sitting here talking to you for an hour. If I had visuals, I think that's probably going to attract you more to the screen than if it's just me sitting here talking to you. So I think that's one thing, but how do you limit that? That's going to be a hurdle we'd have to overcome. They could have something in the background here. They could be watching a movie behind the screen. Who knows? So that's certainly a challenge that we'll have to deal with if we go that route.
For sure. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions. Thank you so much, Stephen, for speaking to us today. Just a few quick announcements for 2021. The Tort litigation section will be hosting webinars and CLEs on depositions, jury selection, and mediation. If you had a different topic that you're interested in seeing on the calendar, please let us know. Thank you so much again, Stephen. Oh, Lauren just wrote in the chat, if you're able to make the annual holiday party, it's next Thursday at the Edison. Thank you all so much. Stephen, good luck on your trial today.
Thank you so much for the privilege of speaking.
Bye, everybody.